Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peeps, today we're going to take a look at Scythe, the long-awaited game from Stonemaier Games. And I will say up front that I believe this is the retail edition, or very close to what the retail edition is going to be. I don't have a board extension or anything like that. I'm just saying that up front so you know what you're getting into when you see the components and things like that. Now, Scythe is a competitive game for up to 5 players, and it's a lot of things, but it's an area control game. It's got 4X elements to it. Thematically, it takes place in an alternate history, early 20th century, where you take control of different world superpowers with like a steampunk bent. You have mechs, like very old rustic looking mechs, and you are trying to spread out and gain resources and use those resources to upgrade your mechs and to upgrade your production and to build different structures, and basically just do whatever you can to get your empire ahead, which in terms of gameplay means getting different stars, different achievements throughout the course of the game, and then getting potentially, essentially, as much money as you possibly can by the end. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played, but then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Scythe is a competitive game for 1 to 5 players. The goal of the game is to have the most money at the end of the game. Money being not only something you can spend during the game, but synonymous with points at the end. The end of the game occurs immediately after someone places their 6th star on the board. Stars are basically symbols of success that you gain for achieving certain feats. I will mention up front that there is a fully fleshed out single-player mode of Scythe called Scythe Automa, wherein you battle against an AI-controlled faction, which is controlled by AI cards. I've tried it, but it is beyond the scope of this overview to discuss it at length, and most of the rules are the same as the multiplayer rules anyways. Each player starts as a different faction and with their own faction mat. Each faction has a different special ability, like the Crimean Khanate being able to use a combat card as a resource, or the Nordic kingdoms allowing their workers to traverse rivers. You will also start with a randomly chosen player mat. This is where your actions will take place, top row and bottom row, but we'll get back to that later. For now, know that every player mat is also different, with top abilities being paired up with different bottom abilities on each mat. Also, even the payout for some bottom actions is different depending on the mat. Together, your faction mat and player mat also dictate some of your starting resources and progress. That includes starting popularity, which is essentially a multiplier for points at the end of the game, as well as a resource for some encounters, and power, which can be used in combats to win out over your opponent. You'll also get money, objective cards, and combat cards, but we'll get to those later. Your faction will determine which mech minis and character minis you'll start with, as well as wooden components for your boards. You'll populate the appropriate spaces with these bits, including placing your character onto your faction's starting territory, which is the large circular sigil, and you'll also put one worker piece into each of the 2 territories adjacent to the starting territory. Okay, everything else is just easier to explain by delving right into the game. Periodically, I will indicate when something allows you to place a star in the appropriate spot at the top of the board. Remember, when someone puts out their 6th star, the game is over, and stars are worth money at the end. Turns in Scythe are really simple. There are no rounds, per se. Rather, when it's your turn, you take 1 or 2 actions, then play passes to the next person, and it goes on and on like this until the end. Every player has an action token. Each round you must place this token on a different section of your player mat, so you can never take the same set of actions twice in a row. Then, you may optionally take the top action for the space, which may actually give you 2 options, and then optionally take the bottom action for that space. Sometimes these actions will cost you in money or resources. Remember again that these player mats are going to be different, and so the allotment of top and bottom actions will be different from mat to mat, as well as some of the gold that you'll gain for those actions. I will also note here that the first time you take control of the factory space in the middle of the board with your character, you get to look at a stack of randomly chosen factory cards, choose one, and place it permanently on one edge of your player mat. This is an entirely new action space with its own top and bottom actions that usually functions a bit differently than the other standard actions. First, I'll explain the 4 main top row actions. The move action either lets you move 2 different units on the map to adjacent spaces, or gets you some cash. Now, moving in this game isn't just moving, it can mean a lot of things. Units can take resources with them, and in fact, mechs can carry unlimited workers and resources when they move, but not characters. You can't move any unit over a river or onto lakes unless your faction has a special ability that allows you to do that. Tunnels are nice because they are considered adjacent and connected to all other starting tunnels, so you can move through them willy-nilly. If you move your character onto an area that has an encounter token on it, remove that token and draw a card from the encounter deck. Every card will have some fine-looking artwork you describe to the other players, and then you read 3 different options and choose which one to do. You might, for example, help some wayward travelers and get a reward of some oil and popularity points, or you waylay those travelers and take even more oil, but lose popularity. Workers cannot move into a space with enemy mechs or characters, but the reverse might happen, where combat units move into a space with workers, which forces those workers to flee to home base and causes the invading army to lose popularity points for each worker. And if mechs and or characters move into a space with other mechs and or characters from an opposing faction, a battle breaks out. The attacker and defender each take a dial and secretly bet an amount of power for the fight, to a limit of 7. They may also put 1 combat card per combat unit of theirs under the wheel to reveal together with the spent power. Combat cards add from 2 to 5 power and then are discarded. Now, during a combat, bluffing and negotiation are encouraged. You may even make out a deal with your attacking or defending player, but the thing is, you must proceed with the combat regardless of whatever deal you make. Whoever has the highest total is the winner, with ties going to the attacker, which is different from most games. If you win a battle, you get a star to put on the board, though all but one faction may only do this twice total during the game. Your opponent immediately vacates the space by sending all units back to home base, including workers, which of course will make you lose popularity. You gain access to any resources your opponent left in the space. However, the loser of a combat can get compensation in the form of a combat card if they spent at least 1 power either from their dial or the cards that they may have used during the fight. The bolster top action lets you gain power or combat cards, but you must pay a coin to do this. If you ever gain 16 power, you gain a star on the board. The trade top action also costs you a coin, and it lets you take either 2 resources of your choice and put them wherever you have workers, or gain popularity. Popularity, as I mentioned before, increases the value of stars, controlled territories, and pairs of resources at the end of the game. But if you get to 18 popularity during the game, you also get to put a star on the board. Finally, for the top row, Produce lets you make resources out on the board. Before upgrades, you can choose 2 different territories where you have at least 1 worker unit, and you produce a resource of the territory's indicated type for each worker that you have there. There are 4 main resources: metal, which comes from mountains, food from farms, oil from tundras, and wood from forests. Just take the bits and put them in the territory. From now on, so long as you control the territories that have these resources on them, you can spend them for your actions by returning them to the stock. But also, you can produce on villages to make more workers. This works a bit differently. The new worker is removed from the left of the space on your player mat and placed in the village, where it can then be moved about as normal. However, as workers are removed, new costs are revealed. When a coin, power symbol, or popularity heart is revealed, you must from then on pay all of these costs every time you take the produce action. Note, however, that producing your last worker also gives you a star. On to the bottom actions. First is upgrades. You pay 3 oil, and you can take any one of the cubes from any of the top row actions and place it onto one of the empty cube spaces on any of the bottom actions. This benefit is twofold. First, it improves the top actions. For instance, if you remove a cube from the move action, you can move a 3rd unit whenever you take that action. At the same time, putting that cube on a bottom row action will decrease the cost of that action. For instance, if I took the move cube and put it on the upgrade action itself, it would now only cost me 2 oil for future upgrades. You can do this a total of 6 times, and when you do that, you gain a star on the board. Next is deploy. You pay 3 or less metal to deploy a mech to any territory you control that has a worker on it. Not only are mechs useful for combat and transporting workers, but under each mech on the faction board is a different special power, which varies from faction to faction, but can include additional speed when moving, the ability to traverse rivers and lakes, etc. Once you build that particular mech, every one of your mechs and your character now have those abilities for the rest of the game. Furthermore, building all 4 mechs nets you a star. The third bottom action is building. You spend 3 or less wood to put out one of the structures associated with each action space out onto the board in a space with one of your workers that does not yet have a structure. You can leave a structure by itself and it's still yours, but opponents may take over the territory that has your structure and then it's theirs. Structures boost the action space that they're removed and built from. For instance, building a monument will let you gain a popularity whenever you bolster from that point forward, while the mine is your own personal tunnel that connects other tunnels only for you when you take the move action. At the end of the game, your structures may also give you bonus coins depending on their placement. During setup, you place a random structure bonus tile on the board with different scoring amounts depending on where you built your structures, like putting them on mountains or forests or next to mines, etc. Finally, the enlist action. Pay the food costs and remove a cylinder from any bottom action space. 2 benefits occur. You place the cylinder onto a symbol on your player board and get a one-time bonus, like +2 power or more combat cards. Also, whenever your neighbors perform the action from whence you remove the cylinder, did I actually just say whence? Anyways, you immediately gain the bonus that's underneath the cylinder, like popularity or money. Enlisting all 4 cylinders nets you a star, of course. Before we get to endgame scoring, I'll mention the final way to get a star, which is completing an objective card. As soon as you meet the condition, you get 1 star, and you can only do this once even though you start with 2 objectives, unless you have a special ability. There are a wide variety of objective cards, and they're all dependent on what happens out on the board. It might be being the first one to get to the factory with 0 upgrades, or being a warmonger who has no popularity but lots of power, so on and so forth. As soon as you meet the conditions, you get that star. When the 6 star is placed, the game ends, and in fact some players may not get an equal number of turns because of this. Here are the things that allow you to score. Every coin you maintain at the end is straight up points. If you meet the conditions of the structure bonus tile, you add the correct amount of points directly. Every star that you placed is worth 3 to 5 points depending on your ending popularity. Every territory you control is worth 2 to 4 points, again depending on popularity. Note that whoever has control of the factory at the end gets to count it as 3 territories. Finally, every 2 resources still under your control on the board counts as 1 to 3 points, depending on popularity. And that's the game. Whoever has the most points is the winner. There's also an achievement sheet where players can write their name afterwards as certain conditions are met. Let's get to my final thoughts. Now, there's something to be said for hype for a game, if I might get meta for a second. And I think that it's very important to talk about hype and what it can do to a person's expectations, especially for a game like Scythe. It's very pertinent here because Scythe has been very, very hyped and very anticipated for the past year or so. In fact, this was something that the designer, Jamie Stegmaier, knows acutely. He even, after he released some preliminary artwork for Scythe, before it was on Kickstarter, before anything, it was still in its building stages, he released some amazing artwork from the artist of the game, Jacob Rosalski, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And people just went gaga over it. And he had to actually put out a statement saying, okay, relax, let's wait till you hear some more about the game, just to sort of set expectations at a reasonable rate. And I know firsthand what it's like when you anticipate a game very, very highly, and you get it in your hands, and you're like, oh, well, okay, it's a game. It's a game. It wasn't like the second coming of anything. So, where does that leave Scythe? Well, just to cut to the chase, what I'll say is Scythe like the greatest game ever? Is it going to set the world on fire and change your entire dynamic and what you see games as in the future? No. But what I will say is that Scythe is an excellent game. And what I will say it's representative of is sort of where we are with highly produced strategic games at this point in modern board gaming. I've said before that I think we're in a golden age of board gaming, and that's not to say that every game is good, but it is to say that people are trying new things all the time. And there are games like the legacy games, Pandemic Legacy, Risk Legacy, Seafall coming up, and Time Stories that really break the I hate to use buzzwords like this, but there's like a paradigm shift, right? That really break the mold of games and go off in wild new directions. Some games try that and it fails miserably, but at least they tried, right? I don't think that Scythe tries anything too dramatically over the top different. There's definitely some interesting aspects of the game that I haven't seen in other games, the way that things are handled. There's someone in my group described it as a synergy to the game that is like nothing he's ever seen in a game before. And yet what I saw primarily when I played the game was elements of other games that I've seen. 4X elements, so exploration elements, resource management, area control, combat, upgrades, tech trees, all of these different things that I've seen in other games. And yet I felt like in Scythe, they were streamlined and in some cases almost perfected. Like this is what I wanted out of a lot of other games that I played that were similar to Scythe, but were just too clunky, too overlong, and just didn't quite have the feeling that I wanted from it. And I think it's a testament to actually the track record of Stonemaier games. When you look at games like Viticulture and you look at games like Euphoria, which are also Euro-style games, I would say that Scythe is more of a hybrid game. But you look at those games and you could have easily seen in other designers and publishers' hands them becoming super heavy, bogged down in a ton of rules, just a kind of only for a very select elite group of gamers. But nevertheless, they made them streamlined, elegant, and able to be played by people who are, ready for that next step of games. And I think that that's where Scythe falls into. And I think it's sort of the perfect type of game for the type of environment we're in right now with board games, if that makes any kind of sense. But let's break it down by its little constituent parts, right? Not little. Everything about this game is kind of big, actually. From the box to the giant potential board you could use on the other side, which I did not use because I didn't have the board extender. It's a big game. But I think it's a testament to the game that while it's big, and there's tons of stuff, and you open the box for the first time, and there's tons of little notes and numbers and things to keep track of, once you learn it the first time, it's pretty easy to get into. And like I said, this goes back to the whole streamlining thing. It's very it's intuitive. Like someone else in my group said, like I said before, there's a synergy to the game that just makes sense and gets you into it right away. And that goes into the components. So you have the player mats, with the really interesting aspect of the cubes that represent the upgrades. You move an upgrade cube from here, and it will unlock something, and it makes something else cheaper. That just makes sense, and it's very, very cool how that works. You build a mech, suddenly, as you're building the mech, you learn new things about mechs, and now they're all better, and your character's better too, because they, I guess, have some mech aspects. I don't know how that works, but so everything just sort of makes sense in the game together with the components, which I think is something a lot of games don't focus on enough. Having that sort of communal relationship between the theme, the mechanisms, and the components, but Stonemaier Games does that very well, especially here in Scythe. Now, I think that the theme is both strong in some aspects and sort of weaker in some aspects. I think it's strong in aspects like the encounter cards with the choices that you can make, and of course the artwork, and all the miniatures are really high quality in the player mats, and it's cool that you're, if you're one of the character factions, you've got a bear or a bird or whatever the case might be. But it's cool that they went the extra mile and put that little stuff in there. Nevertheless, at a certain point, as you're going around the map, taking control of territories, battling the other players, you can feel like it could have been anything. You could feel like it could have just been an actual World War II battlefield or something like that, and that the mechs are just tanks. But I still felt that the thematic aspects that were good sort of outweighed anything that just kind of felt like meh. But other than that, the board looks really good. The artwork is great. As I've said, I could go on and on about the artwork, but I'm sure you've seen it for yourself. And The miniatures are high quality, so I can't really complain about anything as far as the components go. Even like the wooden stars I thought were a neat touch to the game and reminded me of Euphoria, one of the previous games from Stonemaier. Moving on to the mechanisms. I love the aspect that, and this is also another thing like Euphoria, where you are rushing to get these sort of achievements done, but they're much more distinct in Scythe. And I think that's sort of the cornerstone of the game, where you have so many different options of the paths you can potentially go down. It starts with your faction. You have different faction powers, things that you're good at. Some factions are encouraged to fight because you get a potentially unlimited amount of stars from doing that. Whereas some factions are encouraged to just be more mobile. Like I was in one of the games that we played, I was the Nordic faction, and so I was able to my farmers could cross rivers, and eventually my workers, and eventually when I got more mechs, then I could like walk on lakes and things like that. Really cool stuff. So your faction will dictate to a degree how you should what you should focus on. But then you have your other mat, your production mat. Those are different as well, and that's going to dictate, okay, how are my actions, my top row actions, my bottom row actions going to work in unison? It's going to be different than the other players, and I found that also to be very interesting. The aspect of the top row and the bottom row, trying to be as efficient as possible. That's another aspect of the game that I think works really well here. Even better than I've seen in other games where you're trying to do the action efficiency, especially since you have to do a different action every single time. So you have that aspect, and then and all of that is dictating like the different paths that you may want to go down, your different strategies. And then together with that, how you get your stars. There's so many different ways. And I almost think, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I might have to play this game 20 more times to really figure that out. As it is, I've played the game, just the multiplayer version of the game 4 times. I've played the solo version of the game once. I probably should play that again before I really comment too much on it, but I thought it was fine. I thought it was really, again, streamlined, interesting how the automa cards works, things like that, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. But I felt that with the different aspects that you have, the different paths you can go down to get the different stars, there's just so many different options, but I felt that the game sort of punishes you for diversifying too much. Of course, you need to get to the certain amount of stars. You need to get as many of them out as possible. It's not that whoever gets their last star out is going to be the winner of the game, but you're more likely to win because you'll have a bit more of an edge in coins, because potentially how much they're worth. But because it's sort of a race in a sense, if you diversify too much and try to do too many things, you're going to get punished for it. So it kind of encourages you to do specific things more than others. I also felt that like the enlisting is very good because it's kind of double dipping. You're getting rewards from other players potentially, but you're also getting special one-time bonuses. So that's kind of a weird thing, but overall I still felt that it was really cool that you can choose which paths you want to go down. I love the aspect of the popularity. Do you focus on your popularity? Well, if you don't, then none of those stars are going to be worth all that much, and nothing you do is going to be worth that much, so you really want to get that as high as possible. The territories might be worth nothing for you. You also need to worry about the structure bonuses. You can't really ignore that if other players are really focusing on it. What about combat? Do you want to be a combat monster? You probably should to some degree, but unless you're one of the special factions, you're only going to be able to get 2 stars from it. But you might get a star just for maxing out your combat. So there's so many interesting ways that you can go about, and you're rewarded for exploring these different paths. That's probably what I like the most about the game, if I had to pick one thing, is that it's not just that these things exist in the game, but you're rewarded for doing them. So I think that overall the game is excellent. I maybe wish it was more thematic in some aspects. I wish that, I maybe even wish combat was a little bit more brutal. Whereas now it's like, you don't get really punished that badly for it. It kind of makes the combat not all that exciting, although it's interesting that you can negotiate with players a little bit easier with that. And again, I don't think the game does anything too dramatically different than what I've seen in the past. But what it does excellently. It does it so well and so refined and so streamlined that I was really impressed with it. Everybody I played this game with, and I played it with several groups of people, everybody enjoyed it, and that's got to count for something because I played with a very diverse group of gamers. So that is Scythe. It's going to be up to you whether it lives up to the hype or not, but for me, for the most part, I definitely think that it did. Excellent game. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon, and make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.